The Immortal Man achieved feats few builds before it have. Its survivability unmatched, its damage unparalleled, its speed rivaled the Headhunter boys when clearing maps, but at least our screen wasn't obscured by a giant vine-covered human blocking all interpretation of what was going on in the world around us. Some might say the Immortal Man flew too close to the sun. Because of its blinding power, GGG had no choice but to nerf it mid-league, an unprecedented occurrence. GGG changed the build's key ingredient, Purposeful Harbinger, so that now, rather than increasing effects of auras on us by 10% per Herald, it only increases auras specifically from our skill gems on us. This change took away our Ascendancy being multiplied by 5, as all the innate Guardian auras from the Ascendancy were eliminated from being affected. All except Unwavering Faith, arguably our most vital node, was left unscathed after the destruction. This also eliminated any auras granted by items from being increased by Purposeful Harbinger. The speed of the flow untethered was ripped right from our hands, along with many other items that grant passive auras. If we start to sum up what the build loses, the death toll seems too much for a build to survive as a Super Saiyan. 40% more damage? Gone. 40% of mana as ES? Gone. 640% life reserved as armor? Gone. 40% spell and attack block? Gone. 200% action speed? Gone. Phantasmal Might for 1750 flat physical average damage to spells? Gone. Full uptime on Val Haste and Righteous Fire while mapping? Gone. GGG wanted the world to know that the Immortal Man could bleed. I wasn't going to revisit the Immortal Man, but after this change I felt compelled to rebuild him. For those who committed time and in-game currency to following my build, and rebuild him we did. The video you're watching is of the Immortal Man throughout the day as we added various improvements and tested different setups, optimizing the Immortal Man to the fullest. What would you think if I told you that we remade the build and now it has more damage than before the nerf? Because that's exactly what we did. By the end of the day, while clearing a simulacrum, we were testing and observing our tooltip damage numbers with EK on a clear setup with a not fully leveled chain support and cold pen, essentially a subpar 4-link in terms of what numbers you would read on your tooltip. And with a subpar 4-link on our tooltip for EK, we hit damage cap. This means our tooltip damage went above 21 million tooltip DPS, thus causing the game to display a negative number for our tooltip. To put this into perspective, EK is not known as a good single target skill. I don't have quality on any of my support gems or my heralds. I don't have level 21 supports or awakened gems besides Cold Pen. This has been done as the cheap version, where we aren't able to obtain good rare jewels with crit multi, and we hard fix our crit multi with Malagara's virtuosity, thus limiting our glove slot. The only somewhat optimal corruption we have on an item is our Alpha's Howl with +2 aura. We are missing plus gem level corruptions in our shield and our chest, which would greatly increase our damage. Our Watcher's Eye only has 8 pen from Zealotry, a rather sad 1-stat Watcher's Eye in comparison to other options. We aren't even using a Bottled Faith, a flask that would tremendously boost our damage. This build appropriately set up would reach damage well into the 9-digit range. I can't take all the credit on this achievement, as many of the changes to this build were made based on testing various suggestions brought to my attention by many individuals throughout the stream yesterday. Thank you for helping me rebuild the Immortal Man. You know who you are. Let's get right into the thick of it now. How did we truly rebuild the Immortal Man? First off, let's start with the items that did not change. Shavron's wrappings, Alpha's Howl, and Prism Guardian. The classic 3. These items were key before, and they're key now. Shavs lets us reserve our life to fit in a lot more auras, while Prism Guardian helps us efficiently reserve our life with our most expensive auras. And Alpha's Howl gives us a vital reduced mana reserve stat. You'll notice I have a +2 corruption on Alpha's Howl. This is not necessary to do extreme damage, but it is one of the upgrades you could make while trying to ascend the damage cap in PoE with getting plus gem level corruptions on our shield and shavs. Next I will go over the items we changed to our defenses after the nerf hit our ES hard. Our Amulet we switched to using Presence of Chayula for 60% chaos res along with 24% of our life converted to base energy shield. Normally the stat is 20% and can be increased with Tempering Catalyst to hit 24%. We also anoint Champion of the Cause for 4% reduced mana reserved. Our belts We switch to high flat ES Crusader Crystal Belt with flat ES, increased energy shield, and increased energy shield recovery rate. This belt can be crafted by buying a high item level crystal belt, slamming it with a Crusader's Orb, and then spamming dense fossils till you hit the appropriate mods. This, however, is expensive and will only be marginally better than Baited Breath, a 1-alch item, and definitely recommended as one of the last upgrades you make to the character, as it only is a small increase in energy shield. Our gloves we changed to Malagaro's Virtuosity. These gloves hard set our global crit multi to 300%. These gloves are great for saving passives on the tree and allow us to get much less expensive rare jewels. However, if you're min-maxing this build to the extreme, these will not be your last upgrade. If you have a bank account the size of Cuba, you will actually be investing into jewels with double crit multi plus increased ES, along with swapping these gloves out for rare high energy shield gloves with 50% of the damage converted to cold or lightning. This is done with 2 mods that are 25% of cold damage converted, or physical damage converted to cold, and 25% damage of physical converted to lightning. You can find these on Crusader Influence gloves. For our boots, our best in slot is Doriani's Delusion, which give us high ES, movement speed, and most importantly, one of the 3 purities. We ideally want the version of the boot that has high flat ES along with Purity of Ice. We want Purity of Ice as it will help make our cold resistance our highest resistance for getting penetration damage of the appropriate element with Wise Oak, because most of our damage is going to be cold. We use these boots because they free up a gem socket, as we no longer have to socket Purity of Ice into our gear, along with letting us set up a 5-link blood magic. Only way you could upgrade from these boots would be to corrupt your amulet to grant X Herald/Aura we are using in the build to free up a slot, thus allowing us to instead equip high energy shield, movement speed, tailwind boots. Now let's get into how we revolutionized our damage. To start with, we used 2 Call of the Brotherhood rings with 20% quality of the Turbulent Catalyst. These allow us to convert 96% of our lightning damage to cold damage. We then equip Nebulous, a scepter which can grant 20% increased damage for lightning and cold per max resistance over the respective elements of 75, because we have 90% cold and lightning resistance, and we benefit from both these stats when we convert our lightning damage to cold with Call of the Brotherhood. But wait, there's more. We also smacked enemies with Smite, socketed in our Alphal's Howl for plus levels to grant flat lightning damage to our spells. This allows us to take a fire spell, like Fireball, use a lightning skill, such as Smite, and turn it into a cold skill in terms of damage. Wrap your head around that. The madness gets deeper though, because we aren't done equipping more damage. If we can utilize lightning damage so efficiently, wouldn't that mean we can obtain ultimate damage if we utilize Wrath on top of already having Zealotry and Hatred? To achieve this, we need more reservation space. Thus, we need more heraldry jewels. We switch our 6 Endbringer 2 heraldry setup for a classy 4 Endbringer plus 4 heraldry setup jewel, while they all have Purposeful Harbinger on them, of course. This allows us to add in Wrath to our aura setup. With this setup, our lightning and physical spells become our new top damage dealers. Physical spells we can support with Fizz to lightning damage support, thus basically making them lightning spells. With this, we lose a support link, but physical spells also double dip with Hatred, thus I kind of put them on a similar level with lightning spells. But both of these options essentially obtain full usage of getting multiplied by Wrath, converted to cold to be multiplied by Hatred, and taking in all the sweet 600% increased damage from Nebulous. At the same time, don't forget Smite. It essentially doubles the flat lightning damage of any spell you use, if not more. Due to this, with Smite up, cold skills are effectively 75% as effective as lightning skills, while fire spells are 50% as effective. Even at these effectiveness levels, most spells in the game still become viable monster damage powerhouses. And I would still encourage you to make whatever spell you want viable with this build. Most of these clips in the video were taken before I had fully enhanced the damage of the build, as I was upgrading it throughout the day. Now let's go in-game and go over gem setup and the passive tree. We're in game now, and I'm going to quickly go over gem link setups for your main skill, along with where you need to socket all your auras with your blood magic support, with your regular mana reservation, in order to basically get it to all fit in. I know a lot of people end up having a problem with this, and other builds, you really got to follow this exactly to a T, or this stuff is not going to fit in, and it's going to be frustrating. So, to start off with, I'm going to go over gem links. To begin with, there's pretty much some staples you're always going to have in your links, and that is Awaken Cold, Pen, and Inspiration. Now, here's where you start getting some options. To begin with, Energy Leech would be a staple if you don't have a flask that says 0.4% of spell damage leeches energy shield. If you don't have this, on a Flask somewhere, then you're going to want Energy Shield Leech in order to just basically keep yourself alive when you start doing really, really hard content. For the most part, you don't really need it. But anyways, if you're not using this Energy Shield Leech, something like Controlled Destruction for many of these setups is something you're going to swap in. Now let's get into the gist of this, where there's basically a few variants you end up going with. If you have a channeling skill, you're going to have Infused Channeling and Arcane Surge here, and whatever channeling skill goes here, and that's going to be your 6th link. Now, if you don't have a channeling skill, all you're swapping out is, say we swap in Arc, it's not a channeling skill, you pretty much swap in Spell Echo, okay? Those are the only changes you make between going from a channeling skill to a non-channeling skill. Again, all these things are pretty much going to stay the same, except for the other variation, which is when you have a physical spell like Blade Vortex. A physical spell, you end up swapping in a Fizz to Lightning support instead of your Arcane Surge, along with, this is another scenario with Arcane Surge, in my opinion, is better than Controlled Destruction. It has pretty much a similar damage, but you don't have the 100% reduced crit chance, and you get some cast speed out of it. So for the most part, I use Arcane Surge because we don't have really anywhere to link this in supports just to proc it somehow. So the general rule of thumb is when you're running out of like ideas of what links you're doing, Arcane Surge is or Controlled Destruction is basically one of the last things you socket in. But anyways, in this scenario with Blade Vortex, the one thing we got to keep in mind for highest damage is you don't actually put in Spell Echo here. You would actually have Arcane Surge here. Basically because with Spell Echo, you'll be able to sustain maximum stacks without Spell Echo, so it's basically just a damage decrease. And if you want to sustain Blade Vortex better while mapping, I guess you could go with an Unleash support here. The only difference between this Blade Vortex and a regular, just pretend this is a physical spell. If it's a physical spell, the only difference would be you'd have Spell Echo here. So just remember, physical spells use Fizz to Lightning. If you don't have Fizz to Lightning, you're doing a Lightning spell, you're doing a Cold spell, you're doing a Fire spell, whatever it is, it's going to be the same setup. You're going to be doing Inspiration, ES Leech, Cold Pen, Arcane Surge, Spell Echo. The reason for this is the damage you get from Smite is going to give you so much more cold damage than your base damage of the spell you have for, like, say you're doing Fireball, you're going to Smite, and you're going to be doing, like, I don't know, how many more times? 5 to 10 times more damage as cold than you are going to be doing of the fire damage. So that's why we're pretty much always doing Awaken Cold Pen. I'm trying to think. I don't think I missed any generic setups, but that's the gist of the idea of how you will end up setting up these things here. I'm going to go ahead and put this back on, and then we're going to jump into our basically where we socket gems. Okay, so to start off with, we start off with the shield. The baseline of this idea is you want to always have your 50% reservation auras in your shield, because that's where you get to reserve them the most efficiently. So you need haste in here, you need wrath in here, you need zealotry in here. Or you could have hatred in here instead of wraths, and so forth. So basically, if it's a 50% aura, it goes in here. If you have a 35% aura in the shield, you're doing something wrong, and you will end up encountering reservation problems. Next up, we have the Alpha Sal. You want to socket auras that increase our damage in the Alpha Sal. So you don't want to end up putting your purities up here. The purities aren't going to help your resistances anymore. We get max resistance without getting more levels than 20. So you want to make sure you're putting aura things in here that's going to help you out in terms of like damage and survivability. So we put stuff in here that is like discipline. We put smite in here because smite, the higher levels, the more flat lightning damage it's giving us. We put hatred in here. It's a damage aura, getting more damage out of it. And lastly, we have Righteous Fire. That's kind of just whatever. If you could fit, more or less, the other auras I could have put up there are maybe Precision or Clarity, but I don't think I could quite fit the mana reservation for them, so I just have a Righteous Fire up here. You could also socket like Purity Lightning or whatever here as well, or Purity of Ice or Purity Fire, etc. If you do that, though, you got to make sure you're keeping your cold resistance higher, so that would maybe be a way to help keep your cold resistance higher, is maybe having a Purity of Ice in here. Next up, we have Herald of Purity, Herald of Ice, Flame Dash. These are just kind of generically slotted in. Flame Dash is our one movement skill. I chose Flame Dash. If you like a different movement skill, you can choose that as well. In our gloves, we have Herald of Ash, Clarity, Purity of Fire, and Purity of Ice. Now, last up is our last Blood Magic support, and that is Blood Magic with Herald of Agony, with Precision, with Herald of Thunder. And that also is going to be supporting the Purity of Lightning we get from these boots. So the key setup here is more or less For your blood magic support, you're going to have the stuff in the shield along with a blood magic support with a 25% aura or herald, a 25% herald, a 35% purity, along with a precision that you're going to level up based on how much life you have left over to reserve. Same goes for clarity, is you level this up based on how much mana you have left. A thing I should mention is, because I didn't realize this until playing more, but this node insightfulness here gives reduced mana cost while you're at full energy shield. So initially you might be in your base and thinking, okay, arc only cost me 49 mana, which I thought, okay, I'm fine, I'll go into map. The second I went into a map and somebody damaged me below full energy shield, arc's cost shoots up a little bit. And I had reserved so close, like I had reserved down to like 50 mana or something, and it shot up to 55, and all of a sudden I was in a map and I couldn't cast. So you want to make sure you're just a little bit above based on whatever the actual mana cost is when you're in the map. Now with that, we went over sockets of what you got going on here. I'm going to quickly go over flasks. One big one is Ziri's Promise. This one double dips based on the conversion from lightning to cold damage. This is a huge damage flask for you. I probably would recommend it for sure. Another way you can go is, Mana Flask isn't necessarily mandatory. This is just if you see yourself having problems sustaining casting. I don't think I necessarily do have problems sustaining casting, so I probably could have just kept this in here. Diamond Flask is probably best in slot for damage, or one of the best in slots. The Wise Oak is huge for damage, and another thing you could go for is like a Bottled Faith or a Taste of Hate here. I went for a Basalt Flask to cap our Fizz reduction. Quicksilver just for movement speed. I guess if you can go without the speed, then you don't need this, and you could get another damage flask if you really wanted. That's all for flasks. That's all for sockets in the gear. Now we're going to go over passive tree. So, oh, I just realized that I didn't fix this. I was testing something earlier. But anyways, our passive switch, basically for the Ascendancy, we switch from taking Radiant Crusade to now taking Harmony of Purpose and keeping with the usual Unwavering Faith and Bastion of Hope. As for the tree, generically, some of the last nodes you're going to pick up are this Aura Effect node here and this Aura Effect node here. Those are basically just, I arbitrarily threw some stuff in. When somebody pointed out I could save 2 passive points here by using an Intuitive Leap. If you go with a spell like EK, where you need a Threshold Jewel here, you're not going to be able to use this. You'll have to socket the Ring of Blades Threshold Jewel here, and thus you'll have to use those 2 points here. But that's a way to save 2 points if you're not going for EK. Next up, you'll notice one of the big changes is I socketed in energy from within, and we grab this energy shield cluster here. This is very, very efficient energy shield nodes, and it's one of the ways we start making up for how much ES we lost from the nerf. Another way we start making up for loss of the nerf is basically having a high level discipline in our helmet, plus 4 levels from a plus 4 Alpha Sal, so that way we get a lot of flat energy shield from the helmet, or from discipline. Next up, we're going for 2 Voices Jewels, one here, one there, and following it up with a Large Cluster Jewel. Large Cluster Jewel, if more or less, you don't necessarily need to have a 2 Voices set up. If you can't afford that, 2 larges will work, and you'll end up going for 2 Endbringers and 2 Heraldries, or 4 Heraldries. The reason for this is you get so much generic damage from Nebulous, is the Endbringer damage isn't as big of a loss as it would be before, and this makes the weaker versions of this build still work pretty well. But you're going to want to make sure you have 4 Heraldry Jewels with Purposeful Harbinger. For Jewels, you basically want to look for stuff like Energy Shield. Mana's okay, not really that great anymore. We want Chaos Resistance. We want, if you need Dexterity on your build or you need Strength on your build, that stuff is good. You'll see I have some split personalities with Strength and ES or Strength and Intelligence. Really best in slot for split personalities here if you want to min-max your Energy Shield is Int plus flat ES. So if you're min-maxing for getting higher numbers, if I swapped in Int flat ES, Int flat ES, Int flat ES, I would probably hit a lot higher ES. I'd probably get closer to 10k. Not quite sure exactly how close I'd get, but I would get a lot closer to 10k. Other things for Jewels to look for, yeah, is Chaos Res, Energy Shield. If you're able to afford getting really strong Jewels and you can get double crit multi plus Energy Shield, then that's when you start looking at being able to upgrade from these gloves to something else. But without having the bank account size of Cuba or whatever, you're really not going to be able to get Jewels that good, and they're going to be a very good glove slot for you, and you'll still get crazy damage. Trying to think if there's anything I missed. Oh, for large jewels, best in slot for travel nodes at this point are Vengeful Commander, and Scintillating Idea, since we lost so much with the mana nerfs, is no longer the necessarily the best in slot. The best in slot for us now would be Vengeful Commander with something like Blanketed Snow, or I think it's called maybe Snowstorm, which is like gain 10% of lightning as cold. Both of those nodes on the travel nodes would be great for damage for large jewels. Okay, I think that's basically the covers most of the details on the tree. Oh, I should also go over this. You need 1% reduced. You need a jewel with 1% reduced. Well, actually, you need it 2 times. You need 2 jewels with the implicit 1% reduced. You'll see I have Inertia here, and I have Conqueror's Efficiency here. So on your jewels, you actually need a total of 4% reduced mana reserve. You'll see I get 3% from Conqueror's Efficiency and 1% from Inertia. So if you're having problems with mana reservation, it'll be possible maybe you don't have those implicits. Along with, you need to make sure you're anointing champion of the cause, and we are grabbing literally every reduced mana reserve node on the tree. Okay, that I'm pretty sure covers it all. Now we are going to, well, I'm going to switch into basically kind of a rant. Maybe not necessarily a rant, but I'm going to go over kind of what maybe my frustrations are with the whole nerf thing, or how I view it, and maybe my frustrations with people calling it a bug fix when it's just a straight up nerf, slash my argument to what I think about those different changes that occurred. At the end of the day, our build is actually stronger now in terms of damage. We lost a lot of our defenses in terms of we lost a ton of block, and we lost some phys reduction, and we lost the crazy regen from like consecrated ground. That was the big things we lost for defense, and then for offense or slash fun, we lost our speed, more or less. We lost the ability to run around the map fast. At the end of the day, though, we still crush endgame content. I did a T19 100% Delirious, just juiced to the absolute brim. I did it triple beyond, had some crazy mods on it, and I had 4 scarabs in there, spawning as many things possible. I was very tired when I did it. I ended up dying like 5 times, I think. I cleared it on the last portal, killing the boss, killing Kosis, killing all those things. I'm guessing, though, if I min-max this build more, which I definitely could, there's a whole bunch of upgrades I could make, the build can clear T19 100% Delirious Deathless. That's 100% guaranteed within the build's capabilities at this point. So anyways, we're going to switch over to doing a rant. I'll see you guys on the other side. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching the video, and enjoy this little rant. Alright guys, now you may be being overwhelmed now with the crazy paint skills I got going on here, but don't worry, we're going to get to the bottom of it. Okay, so more or less I just wanted to basically do a short little rant on why what happened wasn't a bug fix, it wasn't a fix of any sort, and it was just a straight up nerf. And to hopefully help people that don't understand the mechanics, that are calling it an exploit, that are calling it a bug fix, to help them realize, to be enlightened, you know? Because you got guys like a Pharaoh over here, and he's like, a game fixed a bug I was exploiting. Filthy developers. This guy obviously believes this is an exploit. He clearly doesn't understand the build he's playing. Because if he did understand the build he was playing, he would realize it's not an exploit. Except for this stuff. This stuff, you know, that stuff is buggy. But at the end of the day, these things are not buggy. I'm going to explain that. But here's another one that I thought was funny. Hot take. Anyone got salty at them fixing this needs to reevaluate their lives. This isn't a fix, guys. They're not fixing anything. They're changing one line of code, and they're bricking a lot of stuff that is working exactly how it should have, while not having to go and actually fix the actual bug or the actual thing that was not working as it should have. And then one last one is, yeah, if anything, these nerfs, quotation marks, are really bug fixes and are expected to be fixed mid-league. That I also find is pretty freaking hilarious, because he also doesn't realize that it's a straight up nerf and it's not a bug fix. More or less, I've just been getting a little bit annoyed at people that don't understand the mechanics, that just are arbitrarily labeling it a bug fix, or hey, they're patching an exploit, you know, because that's not what this is. And I'm going to basically go through all the key reasons why it's not, and I'm going to explain it, break it down for you guys, for those curious at least. So to start off with, let's go over some key attributes of auras. Auras are centralized on a creator. They generate passive effects on nearby allies / enemies. Example of enemy blasphemy auras are like blasphemy, flesh with stone. Those are auras that affect enemies around you. It has a radius. You know, once you go out of the radius, the aura is no longer affecting you. And usually, and by usually I mean pretty much always, it's worded as you and nearby allies. You can see this here. I pulled up just a little snippet of anger, and it just words exactly like this. You and nearby allies deal this. You and nearby allies get this, okay? And that's how literally every aura is worded, okay? Now, let's get into the thick of it, okay? So initially, the statement starts off with, internal within Path of Exile, there are a whole lot of things that are treated as auras. And there are a whole lot of things that are treated as auras, and that's because, get this, they're auras. Okay, I might be blowing some people's brains out right now, but the reality is the reason they're treated as auras is because they're auras. That's a complicated concept. I'm sure a lot of the guys on Reddit don't understand it, but we're going to break it down for you, okay? Next up, they read that players don't think of as auras. So this is basically Reddit right here. Reddit's like, these things aren't auras, this is a bug. This is not working as intended, right? Okay? And then they think, and should not be affected by this passive skill, okay? So right now, GGG's saying, okay, since Reddit thinks this isn't how it works, we're going to change our mechanic. So I think, to begin with, stating that a player does not think something that is an aura means it isn't an aura, that doesn't make sense. You're basically giving the player the power to choose, hey, I know you designed this mechanic this way, but since I don't think it's that, you should change it. And that's a dangerous road to go on. It's basically letting ignorance of your player base dictate how your game mechanics actually work. It's completely contrary to PoE. PoE is all about somebody digging deep to understand the mechanics to really build a better character based around understanding all these convoluted systems PoE has. And once you start saying, okay, since players don't get how this works, we're going to change it and make it so it caters to their knowledge. You know, that's a dangerous stance to take, GGG. I'm not sure that was a good phrasing right there to begin with. Next up, we're going to go over, when they say players don't think of as auras, we're going to go over all the things that they removed from being able to be affected by the node, what they changed with this, okay? So to begin with, there's things that aren't actually auras, right? This is stuff that, in terms of, if it was a fix, they would have changed these. Like, the examples of these are Leech, Consecrated Ground Effects, Tailwind. None of these things operate like auras. They do not have the wording like auras. They do not passively do things for you and nearby allies. They have literally mostly no similarities to auras, but somehow they're auras. Okay, so this is what would be an example of a bug. Okay, this is something that should not be considered an aura, right? And then we go over here on the things that explicitly are stated as auras in game. So to begin with, we have stuff like Harbinger of Time. So you see right here, somewhere Harbinger of Time. This is from The Flow Untethered. This is our speed right here, right? It says a slipstream aura. It's literally explicitly stated in game as an aura. And that's the same thing with Blight Spores, Harmony of Purpose, Leercast. You see Blight Spores last for 10 seconds and have a random aura, right? Okay, so that's working as intended. If that is increased by our node that says increased effect of aura buffs on you for each Herald granting you. Yeah, that's working as intended, okay? That's an aura. It should increase this, right? Harmony of Purpose. This is one of the funny things. Harmony of Purpose, I went through and took pictures of all the Guardian nodes, right? And they're all worded the same. They all have the you and nearby allies get this thing, right? Harmony of Purpose literally says this aura, right? So it's stating itself as an aura. Whereas you come over here, you look at Radiant Faith, and Radiant Crusade and Bastion of Hope, all these things they have in like the Ascendancy node. They say you and nearby allies are granted this, or you and nearby allies get this, right? And then straight up in here, they don't explicitly say they're auras, but the reality is they're acting the same way, they're worded the same way as Harmony of Purpose. The reality is they were intended when they were coded into the game. They were made to be auras, guys. To say they aren't is a little foolish, okay? Next up we have, this is from Leercast, and the buff reads, damage aura. You deal increased damage, right? So here's an example of basically an item that grants an aura. This is an example of basically a little passive minion buddy that grants an aura. This is an example of an Ascendancy that grants an aura. And Blighted Spores is an example of creating a little rare minion on the ground that grants an aura, right? Okay, so these things are all auras. They're explicitly told to us as auras. To have these things now not work with this node right here is not a fix, okay? That's a straight up nerf, because this is working exactly as intended, okay? You can't even argue with me on this. These are all auras. They're all explicitly stated as auras in game. To say, oh, the player doesn't know they're auras, that doesn't mean they aren't auras, okay? The player didn't take the time to read, or maybe they don't know how to read, so I'm surprised they're even getting somewhere in PoE, because there's a lot of reading involved. So explicitly stated as auras, these things, if it was a fix, these would still be here, right? These are working as intended, as they should, with this node in mind, right? Next up, we're going to look at nerfs based on things that are implicitly stated as auras, okay? So now we're going to get a little bit deeper into the mechanics of where I mentioned earlier, hey, these are key attributes of auras. The reality is, all these things mentioned here, they're worded the same as auras, they function the same as auras, but they do not have one vital key ingredient that is, they are not explicitly stated to be auras. Like, they don't have the word aura somewhere in their description, okay? And that's all these other Guardian nodes, even though they're worded the same as Harmony of Purpose, they just don't have this one line here, right? That's the difference, okay? And they all have this you and nearby allies thing, okay, that every aura in the game has, right? So we got Radiant Faith, Radiant Crusade, Bastion of Hope, Solstice Vigil, Dying Breath, Victorio's Flight. Okay, all these things, okay, these are items, right? Well, these are items. This is an item that grants basically an ability that works as an aura. And these are things from an ascendancy, okay? So when you read through these things, you'll notice it says, you're being granted, you're being granted, you're being granted, you're being granted. You know what also reads a pretty similar way? Discipline aura, grants additional this, you know? And a lot of the other auras have very similar wording. It's always use the words grants or you and nearby allies have this, right? Dying Breath over here, same wording, grants this, okay? It's pretty clear to me that these things they're the same, you know? They're doing the same thing, right? So looking at Shaper's Presence, it also has the same description where it basically is like you and nearby allies get this, right? And it's the same thing with I forgot to include it, but the Shaper's Presence, when you actually have the aura buff on you, it says something like you and nearby allies have this passive benefit, slowing expiration of stuff, right? All this stuff is explicitly, or not explicitly, implicitly being implied that they're auras. They have the same functionality. So to go over this more in depth, you look at something like Leercast and Dying Breath, okay? In game, the items both have these lines. Nearby allies gain increased damage. And that's from Dying Breath. And from Leercast, it is you and nearby allies gain increased damage. It's word for word the same wording, right? Okay? But one says aura. One does not explicitly say aura. They're doing the same thing, though, right? So both these items have the exact same phrasing. And yet, one is only explicitly aura, one's not explicitly an aura. But they do the same thing. How would these things be different? Why is that one an aura? Why is the other one not? The reality is they're both auras. To say something that acts, looks, reads, and mimics an aura in almost every attributable way, minus explicitly stating itself as an aura, that's just being... to say those things aren't both auras is just being dishonest with yourself, okay? When we actually look at the game mechanics, we actually look at how the game describes these things to us, to put a player into the game and say, okay, this thing's an aura, and then give them also something that's described in the same way, does the same things, and would you think that they come to the conclusion that that thing is also an aura? Yeah, they would, because they have a brain, they can think, they're an intelligent human, you know? People are able to decipher these things and realize, you know? So basically, more or less, I'm basically trying to argue for the fact these are all auras, even though they don't explicitly say they are auras. They are auras in everything, but they don't have that one line when the developer wrote the code for the description of the buff. That's all they're missing, okay? Next up, we're looking at, okay, how they changed it. Okay, they changed it so it's increased effective aura buffs from skills on you per herald affecting you. They basically took it and made it so it's the same as all the aura effect lines on the tree. So originally, these things were changed on the tree so that way they wouldn't work with items and whatnot. Because originally I don't think they were worded that way in the game. I can't quite remember. I'm not sure if I was playing it early enough or not, but I'm pretty sure they had to change this in game, and they knew this was a thing, right? And there's other instances of this, like the shield, the Matatupi blah 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 shield, and the delve chest with the increased effective aura mods on you. Everybody knew. Well, not everybody. People that were into the mechanics knew the effect that this buff here had, okay? And what they're doing is just changing one line of code to basically sidestep and nerf all the other benefits that the node originally had and was working as it should in-game, okay? It's not an exploit. At the end of the day, it's a sidestep of the items actually bugged. So it fixes these by making it so they just don't work, but they're not actually taking the time to actually fix those. Basically, it says this is something we can control that doesn't arbitrarily break internal systems. This is basically them saying, hey, we don't want to take the time to go back and change all this massive amount of code, which I can understand that. To go back and recode all these things, to not have like the aura class or however they encoded them into the game, that probably would be a ton of work, right? So they're saving time, but it frustrates me that they don't go out and just publicly say, hey, we screwed the pooch on this one, guys. We released the thing completely broken. At the end of the day, we're nerfing it into the ground. We're not doing a bug fix here. We're doing an easy band-aid that will make it so these things don't work so brokenly without actually fixing the root of the problem. Okay? Because that's what they're doing. It sounds a lot worse that way, but at the end of the day, just to try to say it's a fix, it's a bug fix or whatever, it's just not true. Okay? Trying to think what else I missed here. Oh, I thought this line was funny. This is, and they had essentially here, a gigantic mid-league nerf. And essentially really shouldn't be in there because it is a gigantic mid-league nerf. To say it's essentially is basically saying, oh guys, this is a fix, but it feels like a nerf. But the reality is it's a nerf. It's not a fix. They didn't fix anything. They changed one line of code and broke a lot of things that should work with Purposeful Harbinger based on the way it was released. And lastly, I thought this was hilarious. It was like the first post to the page that randomly got included in my snippet, and I thought it was just kind of funny how this guy's he's basically like sad that he's like, man, I can't afford this build. It was an exploit that was discovered. So the two things that were funny about this is, one, he thought it was an exploit, and he just is showing he doesn't understand the mechanics, because this here is not an exploit. This here is not an exploit. The majority of the power is not an exploit. This stuff here is the only thing you could argue, oh, we're exploiting a bug in code here. And the reality of this is not the majority of the power. The majority of the power is in all these other things. I mean, we're seeing it now with how the builds turned out at this point. We're hitting damage cap, and we don't have Tailwind. We don't have any of that extra speed stuff. We don't even have the speed from Harbinger of Time. Can you imagine if we still had Harbinger of Time? Man, oh man, would that be juicy. And we should still have it if it was just a bug fix. But it wasn't a bug fix. And next he said discovered. An exploit discovered. Like somebody had stumbled upon it. Like, oh my goodness, I just struck gold. This build is so powerful now. But the reality is, there's many players, myself included, that understood how strong this was before it was released. There's a lot of guys that posted on Reddit and they're like, hey, GGG, this is broken. Don't you think you should not release it like this? And it just skated on right through to league launch, and I was like, heck yeah, because then I get to have fun with it. You know, I get to play around with a totally broken thing. That's a little fun. See how messed up we can make it. You know. So to think this was an exploit and to think it was discovered is, this guy he's not really that. I don't know. He clearly doesn't get too deep into the mechanics of PoE, or he's never messed with auras before, or doesn't really understand the mechanics at all. And he's just speaking from a point of ignorance, and I thought it was hilarious. Okay, next up is the other post right here. I just skipped over the patch notes, because the patch notes are basically them just saying, oh, we're changing this node, right? Okay, so to begin with, GG is basically at the start here. Secondly, it was broken in that affecting game mechanics that it shouldn't have. Anything that was internally classified as an aura. Okay, here's the reality, is that's not a broken thing. That was exactly on release, the way you released it, that was working how it was supposed to. To say rather than just auras from skills as intended, if that was the intention, they would have written the node as such, okay? I find it very hard to believe that GGG, there wasn't anybody at there that was able to say, yeah, guys, we probably need to make sure we put in the part where it only works on skills from your gems, because if we don't do that, then it's going to affect all these other things. To believe that no one in GGG knew what they were releasing and that it affected all these other things, that's a hard sell for me. I think there had to be people that understood what they're releasing and what it affected. I maybe could believe the scenario where they didn't realize how easily you could combine so many different things to make an extremely powerful build with it. I would believe that. But to say, oh, this is working not like we intended it to on release, nah, I don't know. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. It just doesn't make sense. I think people that work at GGG, for the most part, a lot of the programs are very smart people. I feel like they're pretty in tune with how a lot of the game mechanics work. So to say that not one of them or nobody brought this up, like, hey guys, this is broken, I don't buy it. Because the reality is, there was the Delve chest and the Matopio whatever shield. Those things existed in the game before, and everybody knew they affected auras from Ascend. Well, not everybody. People that actually delved into the mechanics knew. Like, I played around with the aura effect chest piece and the shield before in 2 different builds. I made tripping on the build. I used the aura effect chest piece. I made aura bot, a self aura bot scion that killed Uber Elder, and I used the Matapula shield. Okay. I had used those things before. I knew about the mechanic, and there were other people that did it. Like, there was Empyrean, when he was going for his, like, 100k ES just standing in hideout thing, they were using the aura effect on this, like, the synthesis helmet and the chest piece or something like that. I can't quite remember, but the reality is, people already knew how this worked, and it wasn't, like, a hidden thing. Like, Empy's video where he showed himself getting, like, 100k ES in hideout or whatever. He was using that stuff, and that was a pretty popular video. To say, like, people didn't realize what they made, like, yeah, no, I don't buy it, you know? That's more or less what I'm saying. The other thing I thought was pretty funny in this post is we had a look at it, its power level, and it realized it was uncomfortably strong. And I'm just imagining, there's, like, some Headhunter boys at GGG that they play Headhunter every league. Probably Chris, you know, he likes the power level, you know? And he's just getting nervous right now because it's uncomfortably strong, and he's starting to realize that Neon's actually carrying him in-game, because Neon always plays a Guardian, right? And, you know, that's what's making them uncomfortable about it, you know, because Headhunter's supposed to dominate, right? And here Neon is carrying hard. So, I don't know, I just thought that was kind of funny. Another thing is, in the post that stood out to me, is when they called it counterintuitively powerful. That just doesn't work, okay? It's very intuitive that this is powerful. Like I said earlier, there's a whole lot of people that realize this is broken, this is powerful, this is going to be totally abusable, you shouldn't release it in this state, and they released it anyways, right? To say it's counterintuitive is just kind of, that's just from a point of ignorance, of like somebody who hasn't really delved into the mechanics and doesn't quite understand how it works. I guess you could say, like, from point of view where you don't get it at all, yeah, it's counterintuitive, but that's just PoE. Like, if you start PoE, you're not going to intuitively know how everything works, but once you start to learn PoE pretty well and understand a lot of the mechanics, it's pretty intuitive, you know? That's just my hot take on that. Counterintuitive, I don't know if that word works here. The other thing, this line this was a little bit annoying to me, or this is a frustrating thing, is This reasoning doesn't make sense to me. It says, we realized that there was no option but to fix it. So because it was counterintuitively and unintentionally powerful, we realized there was no option to fix it. This doesn't work for me because Headhunter exists, okay? When you think about it, back in, like, I mean, Headhunter's been broken for a long time, but back in, like, Legion League, I can just remember so many people, like streamers and just players in general, everybody and their sister was running Headhunter and just completely obliterating the 5-way Legion, right, with ease. It wasn't hard. Their characters were reaching hundreds of thousands of energy shield, billions of damage, right? That stuff, that wasn't too powerful to need a fix, but this was. And we have less ES. We have less damage, but yet Headhunter didn't need to be fixed, but this needed to be fixed. So, you know, that argument doesn't make sense to me. So I think if they fixed Headhunter, you know, if they decided, hey, we're actually going to nerf Headhunter because it's super brokenly strong, then this argument would work. But they never did that. So that's my hot take on this. For 1A, stop calling it a bug fix, guys. It's not a bug fix. Just own up to the fact, hey, this was a nerf. Same with the people who didn't understand how the mechanics work. Don't call it an exploit just because you don't understand it. It's not an exploit. At the end of the day, it was working how it was released and intended to work based on what they released. I hope you guys maybe enjoyed this little rant. Maybe it was fun for you to see what I thought about all these things, and maybe my opinion was not too painful to listen to. I hope you guys enjoy having fun, hitting damage cap and just completely demolishing the game. Make sure everybody realizes how powerful this is. Maybe we can get nerfed for a second time. I think if we got the build nerfed a second time before the league ended, we have accomplished a feat that has not previously been set like at all. One, to be nerfed mid-league. I don't think that's really happened before. I haven't really, well, actually, I don't know. I haven't investigated a lot of the cases where it's like, oh, this is a bug fix. Because maybe before those cases were bug fixes, or maybe they were nerfed straight like this one. I haven't delved too much into the previous cases. But we've accomplished something great by getting nerfed in the middle of a league. If we can get nerfed twice, we have succeeded at life, my friends. This has been Captain Lance. Y'all have a good one. Enjoy the build. I'll see you guys out there crushing content, making Reddit salty that we're still breaking the game every day in and out, winning. All right, see you guys later.